Okay, and now we're live. Okay, so it's with great pleasure that I'm here, Margaret Senna, she, her pronouns, class of 2017, and I get to have the wonderful opportunity to introduce one of our project leads who's here with us and who will be our facilitator for this evening, and that is Ricardo de Leon from the class of 1986, and who is a co-lead on our fantastic Recuerdos project. So take it away, Rick.
Great, thank you, and thanks to everyone for coming. And I just scared myself with my look here. I'm in Kentucky right now, visiting my home in Kentucky, and it proves one thing, that there are Latinos in Kentucky. I moved here a few years ago, and I don't have my laptop, so I'm doing this off of my phone. I don't have my background, but I do want to welcome everyone and speak to why Recuerdos is so important. So here we are in 2021. It would have been in the 70s when Princeton started to actively recruit people of color. And those individuals are now in their 70s, frankly. They would have graduated anywhere between 70 and 79. That was 5 decades ago. And when I'm doing the math now, getting ready for this, it occurred to me, this is the 5th Recuerdos decade sessions that we had. We had the 70s, and that was incredible to understand their stories and how they came on campus. And from day one, people in the 70s came in about representation, about bringing more people of color to campus. They were incredible when we heard their stories. We had the 80s, and I know we have 3 or 4 people from the 80s here. That was a really odd decade because I think the fruit of the 70s was that they brought more people in the 80s. And that was the first time we had numbers. The numbers weren't great, but we had numbers. There might have been 40 or 50 Latinos on campus in the 80s, whereas in the 70s, there would have been 10 or 12. And we were really, really looking for our ways in the 80s. And I think, frankly, from my experience, we struggled. And then we had the 90s. And in the 90s, people started taking stake again and kind of like really making a claim. We had the zeros, and the zeros were really interesting. People had a lot of varied experiences. And now we're looking at the 10s, and that's this decade that we're talking about. First couple of thoughts there is that people in the 70s could have been your grandparents. And that's kind of scary to think. But people that graduated in the 70s could have been your grandparents. But the sad thing is that most people still coming into Princeton are first gen. And most people coming into Princeton are not legacy. And so when people in the 10s arrived on campus, you most likely didn't have a mom or a dad or a tío or a tía who had been at Princeton or who had been through college. And you were finding your way through and you were trying to figure out where you belong. And the beauty about Recuerdos is that that happened in the 70s, that happened in the 80s, in the 90s. And we got to put our stories down on paper so that when folks come on campus next fall, that they would be able to read about what the experience was like from individuals who were there, individuals that might have been like their grandparents or their parents. How did those individuals work their way onto campus? What was the wisdom that they would share with their kids and their grandkids about how to make your way, how to be confident, how to make sure that you're contributing at your best, that you're not letting others claim their space. So the Recuerdos is about collecting those stories and having them available for individuals in the future who come on campus to learn from them and give them that wisdom that Tío and Tía would have given them had Tío and Tía gone to Princeton. We are them. And so what Recuerdos is trying to do is capture those stories. It would be a story. It could be a poem. It could be an artwork. It could be an essay. It could be any kind of creative form out there. But the idea is to help document the experience and help others in the process. So that's what Recuerdos is. And the team is Juana and myself, Aseneth and Margaret, and then Jeremy Borgern, who was also in the 10s, but he did undergrad and grad, both in that decade. And he's going to be joining maybe later today or in a future session. So that's what Recuerdos is for. With that, we have 2 alums from the 10s who are going to kick off the session sharing their stories. First, we're going to have Asenef talk about what her story was. Asenef graduated in 13, so she would have arrived on campus in 2009. So she saw the turn of the decade, 10, 11, 12, and 13. And then we're going to turn it on over to Laura, who arrived on campus in 2015, graduating in 2019. Through Aseneth and Laura, we have 9 years of the decade represented. And when we were talking prior to this meeting, it dawned on us in the discussion that 2019, in that decade, so much happened around us. And folks were on campus during it, but what happened in the 2000s? Well, President Obama, President Trump, those happened in the decade. And what was it like being on campus, and how were people impacted by that being on campus, and what was the experience like? What were the interactions like given those different worlds that would have happened in the decade? It also was brought up in the pre-meeting that was 2019 was the last year before COVID. That COVID would have happened in the academic year ending in 2020. So 2019 was the last year where there was the full uninterrupted prom and graduation and the whole experience like that. So every decade has its own characteristic, personality. The tens, just in this pre-meeting, became so much more interested in just understanding what would have been going on campus during that decade. What would it have been like there when President Obama was elected? What would it have been like there when President Trump was elected? Did it change? Was it even impactful? And if so, how? So very interested to hear people's stories and kind of learn, frankly. I know there's a lot of people from the tens on, but there's a lot of people not from the tens. I saw from the folks that had gone on before, Yolanda and Jerry from my decade. I saw Modesta, who was an admissions officer in the 80s as well, Modesta was the person who started the first Latino graduation in 1986 as an administrator. So there's a lot of history on this call right now, but the focus will be on the tens and learning from that experience. And I'll just leave it there and start sharing the stories. So I'm going to turn it over to Aseneth for Aseneth to share what her experience was like coming onto campus in 2009, graduating in 2013. And then after Aseneth, we'll go over to Laura and hear her story. And then going through the individuals that have identified on their names their class year, we'll just go individual by individual and just share what your experience was like. Thinking that anywhere like 5 minutes would be fair, understanding that there's probably going to be 6 or 7 people to speak. I think that would be a good amount of time to share your story. Anything's shareable. This is risk-free. Do know, as Margaret mentioned, it is being recorded, but feel free to share whatever you feel like. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Aseneth.
Hi, and I see Ricky popped in. Hi, Ricky. And it's good to see so many familiar faces, and I'm sure more will be popping in. So I'm Aseneth Garza Scott, and I am originally from the Rio Grande Valley. I was born and raised in Brownsville, Texas. And I made my way to Princeton through a program that several people in the tens were a part of, Leadership Enterprise for a Diverse America, or LEADA. And it was housed at Princeton, and I just fell in love with it when I got in. When I got into the program. And it was there that I realized that I could go to a school such as Princeton. I would have never thought of applying there had it not been for that institute as well. And so I started at Princeton, and just the trip there, looking back, was very different from some of my peers that were not Latinos, but like my roommates. A lot of peers, of course, were accompanied by their parents. They had flown before. They had so many different experiences. And actually, my first flight ever that I ever took was to Princeton when I did that program. So it was already a special place from the beginning. And I remember my freshman year, one thing I loved was that, of course, Princeton chose who our roommates were. And through that, I made some great friends that I'm still friends with today. I got my first job at dining services. And in previous Recuerdos, we've shared stories of dining services. For me, they weren't that great. Eventually, I applied to different jobs. And one of my favorite ones was working for Professor Arcadio Diaz Quiñones, who was like a grandpa to me and attended our graduation. And I had the pleasure of presenting him to my parents. While at Princeton, I was very involved. I was in Ballet Folklorico all 4 years, along with Cuauhtemoc here and Ubaldo. And we performed in the Princeton community and in other communities as well. And it was just such a beautiful experience and so many practice hours. But we had this tagline that we would always say, BFL, or Ballet Folklorico Love. And it saddens me that it's not active anymore, but I have so many precious memories of that time in Folklorico. I remember going to see Ballet Folklorico de Amalia Hernandez while there, when they performed at, what was it, McCarter, I think, theater. And it was just great. And we brought in artists as well to show us their trade from Mexico. And Folklorico made me feel like I belonged, along with being a member of Chicano Caucus and being on the leadership committee. I'm thinking of Ricky here with some really great memories through ECCSF and trips and adventures and so many great talks and making friends with people and fellows at Harvard, and just getting to learn also about Mecha and how that was different at other organizations. And Princeton didn't have Mecha. Mm-hmm. I also remember being very close to Professor PFK, or Patricia Fernandez Kelly. And she was just a great mentor, and just taking a class with her. And then Bill Westerman, who was there for writing seminar. We wanted to get involved in the community, and we helped co-create along with other members. And this lives in the archives of Facebook. I was just looking at old Facebook groups, the Dream Team. And I remember going with Ubaldo as well as Grecia to Washington, D.C., and just participating in my first sit-in protest there with involving the DREAM Act. And so that was huge. But overall, it was just a great experience. And I always look back into it, and I loved my experiences at Princeton, but as well as I see kids going off to college, or just the way that they're prepared. Now I'm an educator and I'm a dean of students. And so I feel like I try to give kids all these talks, or just sitting one-on-one with them to talk about how to best prepare for college. And I feel like I would have benefited from that. And but anyway, so that's me giving back, so that eventually if I do send kids to institutions like Princeton or other universities, I can do justice for necessarily not having that myself. So that's a little bit about of me, but I just have so many great experiences, and there were hardships as well, but overall, I like to look on the bright side.
Thank you. And one thing that's definitely, as I think about what's happened over the years, Professor PFK, that the use of initialisms is something that's much more recent, and I think a good thing that happened. that's really cool. Thank you. Let's move over to Laura. And Laura, so you got on campus in 2015. What was your experience like?
Sure. So thank you both, Ricardo, and thank you, Asna, for sharing with us the importance of why we have these recuerdos and how it's going to be kind of a letter to the future. And thank you, Asna, for sharing your story. So fall of 2015. Before that, so I actually got to campus summer of 15. Sorry, I should correct myself, because I did FSI, and that was one of the most wonderful experiences I've had in my life. I was so surprised when I got that letter. I was really excited. I wanted to participate immediately. And through that summer experience, I feel like we've made so many friendships, and we definitely got to dive headfirst into the Princeton curricula, which, no one could really prepare you for as much as you try, especially when you're coming from Elizabeth, New Jersey, which is right next to Newark. So I went to an engineering high school, which was, Southeast Asian, East Asian, and white. And there were some Latinos, but nothing prepared me for the whiteness that Princeton has, which is a little bit of a culture shock and socioeconomically as well. So FSI definitely helped bring peers, POC together, and also like ease you into the academic year, which is great. So fall of 2015, the energy was really high. I think we were just excited to be Frosh. Everyone's starting to sink their teeth into different classes and shopping around and seeing what majors are interesting to them, shifting ideas possibly if, maybe you come in as computer science and end up with a sociology degree like I did. So it was just really high energy. Back then so I think fall of 15 or spring of 16 is when we had some of the BJL protests on campus, which is really interesting to see as Frosh. Back then, I had a lot of unlearning I still had to do. So I was kind of, afraid to go to the protests and participate politically. But that changed throughout my Princeton career because, I wanted to support my POC friends. I was a little timid and still had some unlearning to do, which comes with the Dominican cultural background, unfortunately. But then, came also the elections of 2016, which is heavy because, we all know that Donald Trump got elected. Lots of us cried. The next day it was raining very appropriately. And all of us were commenting on how, that's our mood. That's how we feel. And it was interesting to see how some people decided to act upon the news of the election. Like there was a Trump party where people were just celebrating, and it kind of brought out some of the racist undertones. Some people felt like it was okay to be openly racist now. You start noticing more events like a Cinco de Mayo party where people were wearing sombreros and mustaches on campus. And, we try to tell administration about it, and they're kind of just like shrugging their shoulders a little bit. There are also, Title IX protests, which a good chunk of my class, including myself, were part of towards the end of our senior year. And we actually had a baccalaureate speaker, which was pretty contentious. No one, I forget his name, I'm so sorry, but most of us stood and turned our backs because he was basically saying, like, why are you guys being so sensitive? Like, it's not a big deal, just kind of like get over it. So that's something that we also, it's funny how something that's supposed to be celebratory is tinged with a little bit of that like sour taste, as you're graduating. But overall, my years were great. Moss Flow, I could talk hours and hours and hours about Moss Flow. It's one of my happiest memories. We were a family from the beginning. I mean, freshman year, all throughout, I was in Moss Flow all 4 years. We did everything from study together to attend events. We were always either volunteering or teaching classes to kids or participating in community. But I think one of the great things about Moss Flow is how we challenged ourselves and our community because, for example, we wanted to showcase like, hey, 2 women and 2 men can dance together, which is not typically seen in Latin dance. Or we would talk about, there was a piece about domestic violence and we included a hotline number. We touched all different things. We had a retreat at the end of each year to talk about, what we've done, how we're looking to serve the community. I mean, artistically, of course, we talk about dance, we talk about technique, but it was also about us as people and how we interact in the space, which is really great. So I think my Princeton years are something that I look back on fondly. Yes, of course, a lot of us rode the struggle bus. Sometimes we would be there until 3 a.m. in the Forbes kitchen. But overall, it was something that I'm very thankful for.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. And yeah, as Princeton does come with a lot of so many great experiences, so much learning, and both your stories. Thank you for sharing. I looking at who's attended who's attending on this session, how about we go to, well, this will be an interesting one, to Ricky. And Ricky, or Ricardo Mayo, you and I share that while we were on campus, we must both have been Ricky. And as we get older, our name tends to change. And so when Asenath called you Ricky, I instantly smiled, because anybody who knew me back then still calls me Ricky now. And you also happen to be class of 14, which is the 1 year that neither Asenath nor Laura was able to speak to specifically. So how about we go to Ricky, and then we'll come back to the 13s and just go in chronological order for the individuals from the decade at that point. But Ricky, would you mind sharing your story?
Of course. Yeah, it would be my pleasure. Thank you for the introduction, Ricardo, Ricky. Nowadays I find that I guard the Ricky title for my close friends, and I introduce myself as a very formal, hi, my name is Ricardo. So I see some of my classmates here. I see Asenath, I see Ubaldo, I see Cuauhtemoc. So really a pleasure to see you guys. And it brings back a rush of memories from my time at Princeton. And it's as many people have said, it's complicated, right? It was wonderful, exhilarating, and inspiring. But then there were some of those moments of conflict, right? That really kind of stick with you even after all these years. So just a little background about me. I was born in Mexico, and I moved to the US when I was 8. And my cultural background is my parents are Cuban, so I was a little bit like trying to figure out like my cultural roots and stuff. But I think that went well when I got to Princeton, and I was able to navigate like different cultures like a lot more easily. And even like the fact of getting to Princeton was kind of a miracle. Like I just didn't even see how that could happen for someone like me. And interestingly, when I applied to Princeton, just as a little, because this might be a good lead way to talking about the Dream Team, because I was also kind of involved in that. But when I applied to Princeton, I was an undocumented immigrant, so I didn't actually have my citizenship in the U.S. And I remember just not filling in that information, the Social Security number on the application, and applying to all these different universities, and kind of waiting to see what would happen. And I remember that Princeton was the only school who responded with an offer of financial aid, and I thought that was like a big vote of confidence, even though that I didn't have my Social Security. Miraculously, my papers actually came in just as I was accepting my offers, so I was able to attend, as a citizen. But I just think that was very lucky and kind of a fluke. Like I don't feel like a lot of people have that opportunity and have that privilege. So, and then Jessica Martinez, she's also one of our classmates at Princeton. She attended undocumented, and Princeton allows for that, which I think is a really great opportunity that Princeton allows compared to other universities. So I guess just adapting to Princeton was also a bit of a challenge. I remember getting there, and I grew up in LA, so I was used to dressing in a certain way, and I feel like when I got to Princeton, that was a bit of a shock to me. I was like, what are these bright colors and short shorts and Ralph Lauren t-shirts that people keep talking about? And so it was kind of like a change for me to adapt to that. I remember going to my first lawn parties and being like, okay, I'm not gonna do this. I'm not gonna wear this. I'm sorry, like I just can't. So I wore just like my basketball shorts and like my basketball jersey to the first lawn parties. Eventually, I came around and I did adapt. So I did buy my lawn party kind of outfit, and I think I just saw it as like Halloween. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna dress up for this, and it's fine. But I feel like that just goes to show that the change that you like, that cultural adaptation process that you kind of have to go through as you get to Princeton, and even like learning about eating clubs and all that. I think for me that was a big jump, and it was kind of like trying to figure out how to navigate that while there. Having said that, I do believe that Princeton like inspired me in so many amazing ways. I think just going to school with like very talented and intellectually driven people, it's just such a game changer. And to this day, like I still just like feel inspired by like for example, my roommates, like they're just from all over, right? There's one guy from New Zealand, one guy from New York, one guy from Taiwan, and they just like opened up these doors of understanding that I didn't know were there. So because of that, I think Princeton's like diversity is really, really powerful.
We're gonna try to see if we can get through the 5 raised hands, and then we need to let everyone.
Yes, sorry, I might have
appreciate all the discussion.
Sure. But anyways, great to see you guys. And I'm really excited to hear more about everyone's stories. And that's just a little snippet about me. Since then, I've moved on and now I live in China. So I do admissions consulting here. So thank you for listening.
No, thank you. Interestingly, when I'm listening to you all, and I see a little bit of a parallel to the 70s. When we had the 70s session, it was really nice to see how different references were made back to from one alum to another and how people really helped each other through it. When we had the 70s session, there were so many friends that were there that were just referring to each other and how they helped each other. And I'm already picking up on that because so two people have made reference to the Dream Team. And I believe Yuvando would have been part of it the way I understood this. Maybe we can go to Yuvando next and hear about his story.
Hi, Ricky. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ubaldo Escalante. I'm class of 2013 from Phoenix, Arizona, born and raised. My parents are Mexican from Chihuahua, Mexico, near the border. And like many of you here, or as many have expressed, I was, first generation Mexican American, first person in my family to go to college. Although I was never undocumented, I was still part of the Dream Team because I thought that was something that was very important. Having people on campus that were undocumented and supporting them was very important to me and some of my friends. Like as Aneth mentioned, we did go to DC. I think that was also my first rally that I went to, which was a great experience. But yeah, I think like Azaneth mentioned, actually Azaneth and I also did what is it called that Laura did? I forget. FSI. Yeah, we did FSI together. And so Azaneth and I go back to like the summer of 2009. So yeah, and that was like Laura mentioned, that was a great experience. I think our summer, there were only, Azaneth, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there were only like 4 people from like Latin American background or Latinx or Latino background. So we kind of like just clicked. We were all drawn to each other. And like Laura mentioned as well, I think that was a great experience for us to, find each other, but also connect with other people that also came from similar backgrounds, and people who were also people of color. Most of the students that were there, as Laura mentioned, were also white. So we were, I think, naturally just drawn to each other. But yeah, that was the first time that I was like able to connect with. I think my closest African American friends from Princeton are from FSI, for example, and even some people, some of the people who I met there who are white are also my closest friends from Princeton. So that was a great experience to be part of. And then for me, I think one of the things that I really took advantage of was like studying abroad. I did a semester abroad in Spain, and actually, Ricky was studying abroad in Paris, right?
Yeah.
So he and I met up there. He came to visit me. I went to visit him. That was fun. I think I was actually there for your birthday when I went to go visit you in Paris.
I remember
that was fun. What was that?
Your brother was also there.
Yeah, my brother was also there. And also when I was studying abroad, my parents actually came to visit me. And that was their first time out of the country, out of North America, because growing up, we would always go to Mexico. But that was a great experience that I don't think I would have had if I hadn't been to Princeton, or an institution like Princeton. But yeah, I really appreciate I really liked my time at Princeton. I was very active with Baile Folklorico. For me, that was something that was very important for my community. I think like I mentioned previously, or for those who have been in conversations similar to this one with Alpa, like I went to high school with it was mostly Mexican American, but then the program that I was in was mostly white. I did IB. I don't know if anyone else here did IB, or it's kind of like AP. So like the Mexican American community was always there in the background. So I didn't feel like I needed to like connect with that part of myself because it was always around me. But once I got to Princeton and saw that wasn't there anymore, I had to actively seek it out. So I was very active with Baile Folklorico, ICCSF. I think I helped plan the conference that we had at Princeton. I think it was in 2011, or yeah, I think it was 2011 that we had a conference at Princeton. Acción Latina and Chicano Caucus, and the friends that I made through those organizations are still my very close friends now. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I currently live in New York. I studied architecture at Princeton. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, actually, Maria was very helpful in like helping me navigate architecture at Princeton. There were very few Latinos in the architecture program. I think it was Maria, and then there was also Gabe, and myself. And then my year, there was Carly De Laos as well, who was Colombian. But yeah, I did that, and now I work in consulting as well, like Ricardo. But I do cities consulting, like infrastructure, sustainability. But yeah, always good to see familiar faces and new faces as well.
Great, thank you for sharing that. How about we go to what? I apologize. Cuauhtemoc?
Cuauhtemoc, yeah. Hey, everyone. What a beautiful event. I'll start off by saying that I think, over the past year, no reunions, wasn't able to see some of the people that I usually see. And I have to confess that I haven't reflected on my experience in a while, right, at Princeton. Sometimes you forget, you get caught up in the day-to-day, and it's good to have these moments. I guess I'm calling in from Culiacan, born and raised in LA. So my Princeton experience started off very interestingly. I didn't want to go. I was a Berkeley hardcore, let's start a revolution, young individual. And when I was accepted, my parents, my father especially, put the pressure, is you're going to go, and this is a great opportunity, and you're going to go. And so I went. And so when I started off at Princeton, it was my mentality was, I'm coming into a space that I don't want to come into. How am I going to make it my home? And for me, it was incredibly awesome to see Folklorico already established, right? Very cool to see something that I was very familiar with, with work of previous generations, right, for their posterity. And it was so cool to be part of that group. Waldo, as Aneth mentioned earlier, that group was also a piece of like ECCSF, Ricky Mayo. And so you got to meet a lot of these people with similar backgrounds. And that's sort of what made Princeton home for me. Over time, I then sort of dedicated myself to tapping in and really taking over other social parts of Princeton that are usually exclusive to us, right? Fraternities, eating clubs. And so I really pushed myself into those spaces. And then, around 2013, a year or so before I graduated, I figured that we needed to really create a project that would exemplify Latino presence on campus. And for us and for that founding group, that project was Mas Flow, right? How are we going to dance salsa and cumbia in museums, right? And spaces that are not for us? How are we going to appropriate some of those spaces and make them and home to ourselves and our future people? And that was, like, I would say Folklorico and Mas Flow are definitely my defining organizations on campus. Such a great part. And then going back and seeing how, Mas Flow has become this enormous entity. It's so wonderful to see. But I will say that I think with the help and work that has been done by previous generations, I think by the time I got there, it was definitely more home. And I think my purpose, or my intended purpose, was to make it more of a home for future individuals as well. But I think it's so great to have these conversations here, everyone's different experiences. And I do have to say that, my experience is defined by the individuals that I know on this call, that I mentioned, Ubaldo, Ricky, Azanet. It's so cool to have experienced that, to have been a part of it. And, we're all just here putting in a little pebble of sand in the larger scheme of the quilt that we're building here together. So awesome to meet the rest of you on this call, and looking forward to hearing from other people's experience as well.
Thank you. And it does make a difference. I mean, you call it a grain of sand, but it really does make a difference. And thank you for sharing. I know we have a couple more folks from the 10s to go. And then so maybe we hear from Maria, and then we hear from Andres. And it'd be nice if we were to go back around maybe one more time, because we're actually doing really good on time, on what would be the advice that you would share to an individual coming in next fall? And so next fall will be what, September, it'll be 2022. So for the class of 2026, what would be your advice for them? But we'll go to Maria, and then we'll go to Andres, and then maybe we can kind of reconnect one more time and just talk about that for a minute. If you were Theo or Thea, what would you tell your nephew or niece about Princeton and how to prepare for it? But Maria, maybe we can hear your story.
Sure. I arrived a bit late because I was working an event. So I'm sorry I missed the earlier discussions. And I hope that, I guess, I don't know how to start because my experience wasn't particularly positive. And so I don't want to bring a lot of that into what is such a lovely space. But so I'm from 11. So actually the majority or half of my time, or most of it, was actually at Princeton, was actually in the previous decade. So maybe I should have gone over on that side, because a lot of the probably a lot of the setup for my experience is probably more related to the Bush years, the economic collapse in 2008, which happened right as I was entering college. So maybe that also has a lot to do with why my experience is very different from some of the ones that I've heard so far. So I'm from, I guess, just to give you all some background, I'm from Ontario, California. It's in the Inland Empire. It's in the desert, going towards the desert. It's in the middle of nowhere, especially 10, 15 years ago. So even to this day, that infamous, like when people ask us where we went to school and we just say somewhere on the East Coast or somewhere in New Jersey, a lot of that still happens because the follow-up question is always like, how does someone from Ontario get to Princeton? That's a nice way of them asking. And so to avoid a lot of that, I got to Princeton through the help of a nonprofit organization. I was part of that generation that had the big college access push. So this is just college access, go to college, go to college, go to college, go to a good college. If you're poor, go to a private college because they have the best financial aid. So it was just about access, really. And so when I was applying to schools, someone else created my college list. Someone said I should apply. And I did, not really knowing. I hadn't heard of Princeton. I heard of Princeton through that organization. And I was that kid that was like, oh, like grade deflation. That's the other part of my experience. Grade deflation and a senior thesis. Like, yeah, sign me up, academic torture. Let's do this. It just sounded wonderful. I ultimately ended up deciding to go to Princeton, which I think in a way was already a bit out of the path for people in my nonprofit. They all went to Harvard. And so there was already a Harvard community from Ontario. There was no one over at Princeton when I got there. I think the closest person was from Rancho Cucamonga, and he was a white man whose parents were professors or writers or something like that. Very nice, but still very different experiences. So I ended up going to Princeton just on that like calling of like visiting during April hosting at that time and just feeling like I could see myself there. It was raining and it was gloomy, but it really did feel like I could be happy, I could be sad, I could be, everything all in that place. I could take a walk, I could dance if I wanted to, though I'm not much of a dancer. So it was essentially like just that gut feeling of like, I feel okay here. And so in terms of majors, I was looking at the Woodrow Wilson School because I wanted to do international politics, public service, all that kind of stuff. And one of my first like welcome to Princeton moments was really just going to those department open houses during your first week there and hearing the kinds of conversations that people were having with Woody Woo faculty and saying like, oh, I just came off of an internship with the State Department because my mom works there. And I was like, what? Like, I just found out what the State Department is. And so that was kind of crushing. And so then I very quickly became undeclared. And so that wasn't such a good start. But luckily, my roommate luckily was experiencing something similar because she was pre-med. And so, of course, academically, like it just kind of brings you down so quickly. So she was also a bit undecided. And we just decided to take a class together. And I said that I'd take a science class with her. I took MoBio with her. Well, I signed up for it. And then she took an architecture class with me. It was like the big survey class. And what really got me was Esther da Costa Meyer. She's a Brazilian faculty member. One, she's a woman. And two, she was just like the most erudite person that I'd ever like heard. But then she breaks down and like a Gustav Klimt and some kind of like, what's that guy? Gaudi architecture, like building piece. She puts them side by side and she starts going. And then she says something about the erotic ecstasy of the facade. Right. And I'm just like, what is this woman talking about? It's a building. How is a building erotic? And I was just like, but that phrase is kind of like my welcome to architecture moment. And that's really what got me hooked and kind of got me on the architecture path. And it's funny because all of my family members from Mexico are architects, but in like the Mexican way, right? Building in concrete, structures oriented, function, building fraccionamientos, all of those types of things. And so I was always like, no, like that's not what I want to do. And then I go really far away, and it's like, hey, guess what, Mom, I'm studying architecture now, which was kind of a really funny way of coming back to all of that. I was in the architecture department, which, as Ubaldo said, wasn't there. I mean, there wasn't a lot of us to begin with at Princeton, and there certainly weren't very many of us in architecture. And architecture is like the part that was really frustrating, and something that I didn't like when I was 17, and probably most 17-year-olds don't even realize this. Like, I went to the best undergraduate institution, and I ended up in a department that cared nothing for its undergraduates. The emphasis of the architecture school is in its accredited master's programs and its PhD program. The undergrad program will get the crumbs in terms of faculty resources, who your undergraduate thesis advisors are, all of that. So that's one thing that like is continues to be in the back of my mind as I reflect on my Princeton experience. It's just, it was wonderful and it was great. And I'm so glad that I ended up in that discipline. But out of all of the places, like out of all of the things that Princeton is known for, I ended up in a department that isn't exactly like that, or structured to be that undergraduate focused place. For me, socially, Princeton was very difficult because I'm not a dancer. And at that time, if you weren't in ballet folklorico, like you weren't in the Latino community, because that's really like one of the few things that there was for us to really do. And probably the biggest shock was Princeton was really the first time I acknowledged class. It was the first time that I saw that Hispanics could come from financial means. It was the first time that I heard that someone whose native language is Spanish could have a private plane and go around and visit whatever places they wanted to. And so for me, like that was just a foreign experience. And so my friends, my crew were the international kids who parents were also working class, or even if they were professors in Romania, the professor salary isn't very good. And so for me, my community was the international students. My roommate from Tanzania, my best friend is from Romania. My other roommate is from South Korea, and so she was rich, so she's on the other side. But yeah, that was where I found my little piece of comfort in feeling foreign, because in many ways, I think one thing that helped, one thing that I realized I didn't have that was helping others was that bubble, that click. And to be really honest, and I know some people are here on the call, like Chicano Caucus, Ballet Folklorico was very cliquey when I was a student. And if you weren't in that clique, if you weren't in that group, like you didn't really belong. I remember having a pretty heated discussion with someone in leadership position, in student leadership position within one of these groups, because for me it was really frustrating that all of our budget would go towards alcohol for the folklorico after party. Like we didn't have a presence on campus. And I ran for social chair. I don't even remember which year. I ran for social chair just because I was like, I'm going to have like one event that isn't in someone's room and that it's open to the overall Princeton community. And I think for me, it was really important that the other part that I was wrestling with was, at the time, anything Asian related, East Asian related, was very novel to the predominant white population at Princeton. So there was like the Asian night market and all these things, and everybody was like, wow, Asian culture is so wonderful. And I'm like, yes, so is mine, but you don't seem to care about mine. You don't want to know about our food. You don't want to know about what's south of the border. You don't want to know about me. Like, why do you feel like you know us? And you're not curious about us. And so for me, it was really important to have at least that one event where it would be open to the entire community, and we could try to get basically white people to care, which, it's not super healthy, but that's where I was when I was 17 to 20 or so. And so one thing that I was really proud of was we hosted like a salsa night at the brand new field center at that time. And we had like a lesson to begin with. And then we brought in a live band from New York City. And it was such a wonderful event. And we had such a great turnout. And it finally felt like my culture was being acknowledged or even like recognized or even acknowledged. So that was probably like my highlight in terms of Princeton Latino culture. But I didn't get too deep into the politics, but at that time there was also all kinds of politics with like Acción Latina, Chicano Caucus, and like all of the different groups. And so that was probably like another layer of like why being Latino at Princeton in like the late aughts was a mess, its own specific kind of mess. And so, that's kind of like looking back, I think that's really where I had a lot of personal growth. And I've also had like a decade away from Princeton to think back on all of this. So that also adds a layer of perspective. But certainly the other part where I think my experience was, I was just unprepared for it all. And the school just really had no resources. If they don't have resources now, back then it was a different, and I'm sure even like way before that, it was probably even worse, but like they got it. I really did feel like they put in all of their effort to recruit us. And then once we're there, it was like, oh yeah, you want something that's related to your culture? Go to that little chapel, that little nook in the chapel that has the Virgen de Guadalupe in it. And that was about as much acknowledgement as like in terms of a space that we had. And then, that gets into like well, what if you're not Catholic? And what if you're not from Mexico? And what if, what happens if you're Jewish and Latino? Are you going to go? And, like all of those other things. That was the one space that we had. And I did take advantage of it, not because I was particularly religious, but that was the closest to home. Really, it was a religious aspect because just culturally, I guess my family is culturally Catholic rather than religiously or spiritually Catholic. So like that was the one place where like when a friend passed while I was away, I was there. When I wanted to quit and I couldn't call home because my mom would just tell me to come home, I went there. I guess my special place on campus is the Princeton Chapel as well. But yeah, that's about as much as I can remember right now. Sorry to not be as positive, but certainly it's 10 years ago and in a different place now. I do Inland Empire ASC. I volunteer with ALPA. So my relationship with Princeton is much different. But that was my time there.
I think your time resembles mine quite a bit, I would say. And I know my favorite place around the chapel, I forget what it's called, but there's a little garden. Is it Hibben Garden? Right at the on the side of the chapel towards Firestone. There's a little garden, and there's a bench, and there's a bird bath, and the bench says, "Come ye yourself apart to a lonely place and rest a while." And I used to go there a lot and just go have my Hoagie Haven sub and a grape soda and just rest and reflect. So I really respect your experience, and it's very valuable. One thing just to reinforce, like the Recuerdos is about documenting these items, and every story is an important story. Every experience matters, and please take time to write these thoughts down. And again, think about the incoming new student. I don't want to say freshman, the incoming new student, and what would be helpful for him or her or they as they start their Princeton experience, because there's a lot of wisdom on this call. We're going to go to Andres and then to Jose. And then maybe we can, again, just go back to everyone about the advice he would give. And then we need to take a photo. We do need to take a group photo of everyone. So we'll do Andres, and then we'll do Jose, and then we'll take a photo. And then we'll do a quick kind of revisit with everyone about words of advice, if okay with everyone. Andres, can we go? Would you mind sharing your story?
Yeah, that sounds great. So hey everyone, I'm Andres, and so it's class of 2017. So I just missed a lot of you. So I studied computer science, and I'm like a computer programmer now. Coming into print, I'm originally from Florida, and my mom is Bolivian and my dad's Portuguese. And so coming into Princeton, I actually hadn't had a lot outside of my house growing up. In the town that I'm from, doesn't have a large Latinx community. And so I grew up with, I think it was a largely predominantly Black community and white community in my high school and who I grew up with. And so I think I was used to navigating a lot of, like, my friends were in those groups, and coming to Princeton, I think I can't remember who mentioned this, but unlearn, I think it's Laura, about unlearning a lot, about, going into Princeton. I was also, the part of Florida I'm from is like Southern, and had some of the stereotypes you expect of the South. And so I think I was faced with a lot of these things coming to Princeton with, like, what does my Latinx identity mean? What is, or Latino, I guess, in my case, what does identity mean among all these different identities? Like, what's whiteness in the South and what's whiteness in the Northeast, and how does all of this play out? I think, like, over my time Laura mentioned the Trump election, and I think that was a pivotal time on campus. I remember, so I was in an eating club, and we were all gathered around watching it. And when they announced Trump was the winner, I just remember everyone was, like, silent, and some people started crying, and it was like a shared moment of sadness. I know that there was one friend that I have was undocumented and was a dreamer, and they were worried. He was worried about that, his future, what would happen, and I know that time was a very sad time and from what I remember, but outside of that, it was interesting too, because right when I came in, they had just, like, after my first year, they ended grade deflation, which was also a big thing that had been at Princeton for a while. I don't think we felt the immediate effects. I think it was more gradual, especially being in computer science. I think it didn't get any easier. The P sets were in upper math, and I did the engineering computer science, not the BA. And so I took a lot of the engineering prereqs, and I did not do well in a lot of those, but I made it through. And I think a lot of times I just had questions of, like, my capabilities, of, like, who I am. Like, I looked around in all of my computer science courses, and I was the only Latinx person in most of my classes. And so at the time, like, for my class, computer science was actually ended up being the most popular major for our class. Economics was second. And yes, and Eisgruber got inaugurated too, freshman year, or my first year, which was interesting too, seeing that shift. And I think with all of those changes, like the impact of all those didn't feel immediate. I think it took time. I guess also one thing I want to mention is coming in, I also was in dining services. So I had an on-campus job that was okay. I wasn't, after doing it just my first year, I was like, I need to find a library job or some other job. And so then I ended up finding FRIST, the building staff, which kind of became my, like, I guess, Princeton is involved. I think Maria was talking about, like, Princeton has a lot of cliques and things like that. And it felt like I found like the building staff was my clique, I guess. This was a lot of the people who I hung out with, is a lot of the people I spent time with. And because I worked a lot there at the campus center. And I really enjoyed that because the shift, it wasn't as hot, like with the dishes and all of that stuff. So being able to work at the campus center was much better. And I think largely through the experience. Also, I don't know if anyone had mentioned, the main group that I knew when I came on campus was like Princeton Latinos y Amigos, which changed to Princeton Latinx y Amigos, or Amiguex. I'm not sure actually. Yeah, that's a lot of saying it. But that was, I don't know prior to that what the politics of things were, but I mean, there was still definitely some present going into that. But I do remember that going to a lot of those Princeton Latinos PLA meetings that helped me, I think, discover a lot of my Latinx identity and like how that fit in. And I met friends in it, and like we had some of the food and dance and different things that I remember, like specifically there was this one event that we were having, and then there wasn't like a Bolivian flag. We had a bunch of different flags, and then I asked, could you guys put up the Bolivian flag? And then they put it up, which was awesome. And so I think it was like a really accepting community within that. And that's mostly what I remember from my time. I wrote all these things down because I didn't want to forget anything, but I think that's like most of my experience.
Thank you. And I love the fact that you wrote them down, and please, like, it's important. We got to put our stories down. But hey, a couple of people do need to leave. So how about we do the photo now, and then we speak to Jose? Is that okay with folks? And Margaret, and would you be able to do that from your phone?
Absolutely. Perfect. Okay. So if you don't want to be captured photographically, just switch off your camera, please. But if you do, give us a great big cool Alpa smile on the count of 3. Let me get this right here. So 1, 2, 3. Look at those beautiful faces. Thank you very much. I got it. Okay. All you, Rick.
Oh, no, I'm going to, yeah.
Passing it on.
I'm passing it on to Jose.
Jose.
Jose, are you available to share your story?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. I was the person on the phone. Sorry if I am muted. I didn't mean to. I was commuting home. You guys just gave me the best commute home ever because I got to listen to all these wonderful stories while I was driving home from work. So it was terrible traffic jam. So I guess I did a little cheating. I got to speak at the class of 90s because that was my original class. And now have the pleasure of being in the great class of class of 2019, where Laura Peña is part of that class. And she's one of our leaders here at Alpa. I want to thank her and all of you, Ricardo and Margaret, for putting putting all this together. This is really amazing, helping us remember. Laura, the Caucasian fellow who spoke at our baccalaureate, his name was George Will. He was one of Ronald Reagan's cronies, and he wasn't very nice to people. He would write op-eds about women who would suffer sexual assault on campus, wore the wrong thing or something. And it's funny because at baccalaureate, we turned our back on them, but you guys did. I wasn't in the know. I didn't know the fix was in. I was, a bit of an outsider being, I could be people's grandpa the way Ricardo was saying. But yeah, also I couldn't stand for 45 minutes. And I really admire at baccalaureate, imagine standing there for 45 minutes with your back to the speaker. I think that was an amazing baccalaureate, and that was really cool to be a part of that in 2019. I admire everything we shared here. And I hear what all the friends are worth saying. Looking back, it doesn't feel like all the experiences were positive. So it's kind of hard to sit here now and talk about, let's talk about Recuerdos. It's all fun and happy. Everything wasn't all fun and happy. Just like Andres, I just had so much work, so many problem sets. I was a math major. I was very thankful for Laura for carrying me. We took a sociology course together, and I had no idea what was going on. Can any of you relate to that? Taking a course at Princeton, having no idea what's going on. But Laura carried me, and she took over the group project that we had to do, and that was really great. And so, yeah, looking back on the time, I do want to share that I think we all took a shot and we did the best we could with the opportunities we had there. Certainly my experience about coming back to school, 25 years later to graduate was interesting for me. But yeah, campus at Princeton, there's so much privilege. And I remember one of the classes we took that we had, it was a Caribbean history class, and there was a lot of us Latinx in there. But there was also, sociology majors and history majors. And yeah, being from Puerto Rico, born and raised, I had people ask me, so you're from Puerto Rico, does that mean you're part of Spain, right? Did you fly from Madrid? Did you do they have electricity in Puerto Rico? So those are all interesting questions to get. But yeah, discrimination and racism is not fun for anybody. It wasn't fun for me. The professor would mention how disenfranchised Puerto Rico is, how it's not allowed to vote and for president and everything else. And yeah, it's just it was very sad for me to see fellow students from the class of 2019, otherwise Caucasian, we say, of course we can't admit Puerto Rico to vote. Then they would all vote for progressive things, and that we can't have that. So there's no way we would ever grant statehood to Puerto Rico, etc. So yeah, Princeton was somewhere where I learned a lot of great things. I'm still in school, trying to get my graduate degree now. But overall, positives and negatives. I do think that, yeah, I was very happy to meet the people I did, including Laura. And it gets my mic at a thing. That's very nice to hear. And thanks for putting this together. I really think it's important for all of us to claim our space. We are part of Princeton's Populist too. Everybody that came before us set the stage for us to be there. And moving forward, I do want to help all the students. I signed up to interview people who are applying, and I told the people that are assigning me interviewees for Princeton that I would like to interview Latinx and first generation the way I was and everything else. So hopefully that'll work out. Thanks for listening. Thanks for letting me share my story, and thanks for putting this together. A great time.
No, thank you. And to be clear, the Recuerdos, it's not about sugarcoating anything, to be clear. I mean, our Princeton experiences are very varied. And so from some of the stories shared in the other sessions were really eye-opening about the experiences people went through. And there's a lot to learn from that. And so my own experience, I would say, was only 30% good. 35 years later, I do it all over again. But there's no sugarcoat in it whatsoever. And that's what's important. That's why it's important for us to share our stories, because we want to make it better for the next classes. so that the lessons that we learned don't have to get relearned over and over and over again by the new 17-year-old coming onto campus. If we could be that Theo and Thea to help share our wisdom, that's the intent of Recuerdos, good stories and bad stories. But anyway, we went from being a little bit ahead of time to being a little bit behind. So how about we go back to Aseneth and we go back to Laura and just have them share their closing thoughts and their advice. And then on the chat for folks to share their thoughts there too, on advice they would give folks. But we listened to 8 or 9 people from the 10s. Every story is important. Every story, there's a lesson. There's a pearl of wisdom there for others. Please consider writing them down, and the good and the bad. Everything there's a reason. I know. I believe it was Maria mentioned it. It took me 10 years to go back to Princeton after I graduated to reconcile my experience and be able to put it in perspective. There are a lot of folks on this call that haven't reached that 10-year mark. And it takes a lot to come back and it takes a lot to share. So thank you for doing so. We'll go back to Aseneth and then we'll go back to Laura, please.
Oh, wow. So many thoughts. I've really enjoyed listening to what everybody has been sharing. And I love just reading the chat as well. So just a couple of things. I think one is advocating for yourself. I started off pre-med, and when you all were talking about, I think it was Maria also talking about architecture, just like getting admitted, but then once you're there, having the support system. I was so grateful for FSI because I was failing chemistry, and eventually I had to let go of being pre-med. And I wish I had advocated for myself a little bit more and known how to use my voice, because the response that I kept getting was, oh, don't worry about it. You can do a postdoc. But in my mind, I was thinking, what's a postdoc? How am I going to pay for that? Like, I just got Princeton fully funded. That's not an option for me. So I think just negotiating better and understanding that. Finding your safe space. Of course, mine was folklorico, but also leaning into different spaces like Cuauhtemoc was mentioning. I was very anti-eating clubs when I was there at Princeton, but eventually I joined a Brown co-op. And I'm glad that I pushed myself out of my comfort zone. And I met so many cool people that I wish I had met earlier in my junior year. And if I had also just tried different organizations earlier on, my circle of friends would have only widened, but I'm really grateful for the friendships that I did make. And I felt like, I leaned a little bit too much in my safe space and was afraid to take some risks. And eventually I did my senior year, but it would have been all the better if I had done it from my freshman year as well. And then take advantage of the internships. I didn't do one. I wish I had done an internship from Princeton, because so many jobs, things that you apply for ask for that experience. And it really just shapes the outcome of when you apply to a job. And then the Fred Fox Fund, I discovered that I won it like 3 times. Really easy way to get grants to travel. And I got a whole classroom. I think we were 20 of us, 12 of us. And we went to Guatemala and studied the portrayal of the end of the world. And then I got it for anthropology. So like Princeton has so much money. It's just figuring out how to navigate and making budgets. I would say learn how to make a budget, and then Princeton will find a way to give you money. And it's still active. So the Fred Fox Fund is a really easy way to get something funded for you.
Thank you. Laura?
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who shared. And thank you for, both the happy memories and the ones that might be, difficult. Or not difficult, the ones that are, a little bit bittersweet, or if not, still something that we're working through. So thank you for sharing, all of those perspectives. Aseneth, you're absolutely right. I agree. Please use the money Princeton has. They have a bunch. My advice would be to study abroad if you can, because I had a wonderful experience in Brazil. And even if you're the only one who goes, you'll still meet a bunch of people and make lifelong friends and have great experiences and grow a bunch. I think my advice to an incoming freshman, oh gosh, there's so much I wish I knew before going into Princeton, but I think the number one thing is don't be afraid to find your people and be open and vulnerable with them, and to just be in the spaces that are yours. I wish we'd been better at communicating that the Latinx space is also for like Asian Latinx or Black Latinx, for Latinx of all walks of life. Because I think that's something that I saw at graduation. I was like, wow, look at all these beautiful people, but too bad we didn't make them feel at home enough on campus. So if you find yourself to be in one of those groups, the Latinx community is here for you too. I think don't be afraid to sign up for too many extracurriculars and then change your mind. Because I bit off more than I could chew my freshman year, but it was one of the happiest decisions I made, because that's where I made so many friends in the dance community and in other communities as well. Don't be afraid to change your major, even if it's halfway through sophomore year. That's what I did. I did the engineering coast track, like Andreas, for some time. And I thought that was something I was passionate about. But then I realized that sociology is something that's much more, it just gives me purpose. It makes me happy. It gives me purpose. And it's okay if your family, ask you, what's sociology? What are you going to do with that degree? We'll tell them, hey, I know Lara and she works at a tech company, so she does okay. And so I agree with Asana too. So comfort spaces are good, but also feel free to break out. I was meeting club too. That was a positive experience. Cap and Gown is a wonderful home as well. One of my roommates was white and she's a phenomenal person and I still talk to her to this day. There's so many things that you'll find about yourself, things that you love, things that you're not so fond about, but be patient with yourself, I think is also a big one. You'll make lots of mistakes. That's okay. You may end up at Makash. It happens. You may, find yourself at lawn parties a little bit dazed and confused. It happens. But I think the most important thing is just to take one day at a time and just really experience everything as much as you can.
Excellent. Well, Margaret, I'm going to do something we haven't done before. I hope that's okay. But we have Cora, we have Marcia, we have Inocencia, we have Modesta. We have 8 folk, or those individuals from classes prior to this decade, aside from you and me, Margaret. But Marcia and Inocencia and Modesta and Cora have been to a couple of these, if not more than a couple. Would any one of you all have a question for the class of the decade of the tens? Cora, Inocencia, Marcia, Modesta.
Oh, Marcia, you're muted.
Unmute. Okay, now am I unmuted?
You're fine.
Yes.
Okay. I would ask the classes of that decade how we as more seasoned Latino alums can be more accessible, more helpful, more supportive, and any concrete ideas.
Great question. Anyone from the decade have any thoughts? Any initial thoughts on that?
If you give me your email, I'll email you right away. Ask you a bunch of questions. I think it's just getting to meet all of you guys, because I don't know as many people. And someone else mentioned that reunions, I think it was Cuauhtemoc who just signed off, but we haven't had reunions in a while. So we're kind of missing out on you guys a little bit. So I think even just, chatting would be helpful.
Well, maybe it's a good way to introduce. We're going to start having recuerdos per topic. So we want to have a recuerdos for Ballet Folclórico, and a recuerdos for Mass Flow, and a recuerdos for the Third World Center, and a recuerdos for Chicano Caucus and Acción Puertorriqueña, so that we do them by theme, so that individuals who would want to speak on that theme from all decades would be able to come in, and we could get maybe the history of LA Folklorico, and people can speak of it from its initiation in the 70s and 80s to what it was like in the 10s and the 20s. And we could just kind of like do that timeline on that theme, and that could help people talk together about a theme that they have, an interest that they have in common. That could be similar to what you said right there, Laura.
Yeah, I also want to just add, Laura, one of the really wonderful things about doing this is that you realize, who our founders are, who were the first people in our positions. And Marcia didn't say this about herself, but she was the first Chicana, Mexican American woman to get a degree at Princeton. So we are in the presence of, legends. And how cool is that?
Wow.
I do have a response to Marcia. I think that knowing that if our own experiences are difficult, it couldn't have been any easier in previous decades. But yet somehow you all turned out fine. You all went to law school. You all did all these things that are still associated with the excellence that's expected of Princeton people. So just having some insight into what were some of those downfalls, what were some of those additional resources. Maybe they weren't even related to Princeton. Maybe it was finding someone afterward that put you onto a track, because I think, especially like I'm about 10 years out now. And so it's about that time where it's like people have either made it or it feels like you haven't made it. And so even to like dispel like that there's a timeline, that there are expectations would be helpful, because again, y'all are fine, more than fine. But it's hard to figure out like how to get just even examples of like how like the life trajectory of people would be helpful.
And to piggyback on what Maria just mentioned, I think for me, it would have been really beneficial in my career as an architect if I had known alumni who did architecture and seen what their trajectory was after Princeton. Like now I know Javier de la Garza, and he's a wonderful person, but at the time I didn't have that network, and it might have been my own doing that. I didn't actually seek out ALPA in that way, but I think if just moving forward, if we could have more opportunities for current students to connect and network with current alumni, to just like, maybe just discussing job opportunities, or just even like what we're doing now, just know each other's stories and see what happened next. I think that would be very beneficial to current students.
Hey, Margaret.
If I could respond to Maria's question. Maria, life is a long arc. And I think it was Laura who more or less alluded to the need to be patient with oneself, believe in oneself. You are all high achievers. And just for some people, the path may take longer than 10 years. For those of us, for example, who have pursued PhDs and who have had long ABD periods, moments of self-doubt can occasionally intensify, but your career path, and that's where you need to have that awareness, is not necessarily like another person's. So you have to continue to believe in yourself, and life brings you through many stages. So you all are doing fine. Just keep on keeping on, as the saying goes. I have one question for all of you. In what way has Princeton taught you more or opened your eyes to the Latino experience, to history, to language, to culture, high and low culture? Where are you all headed? in terms of as Latinos? How are you evolving? And I'm not necessarily asking you to give me an answer, pero ¿en qué nos convertimos, mi gente? ¿Hacia dónde vamos? Y lo que le propongo a cada uno y a cada una de ustedes es introspección. ¿Somos lo que fuimos? Claro que no, pero ¿de qué manera seguimos siendo latinos? ¿Contribuyó Princeton? ¿Aprovechamos esos espacios apart from the socializing? And I'm not asking anybody to necessarily answer. I'm just saying we're here together for a reason. We come from varied backgrounds, but did we mine individually the caudal, by caudal I mean the mine, the wealth, the treasure trove of information, whether in the library or professors, that Princeton does offer to follow our paths and enrich and strengthen our organization going forward? That's my question to you. ¿Somos lo que fuimos? ¿En qué nos convertimos? ¿En qué hemos de convertirnos? ¿Qué dejamos atrás? Think about it.
That's fun. Maybe we can get a couple of responses, and this really goes to more dialogue amongst us and different themes. Like from hearing the questions, maybe having a session that's career focused and on different careers, and one that might be focused on different experiences. But anyone have any thoughts to Cora's question?
I think that's something. Thank you, Cora, for bringing that up, because I hadn't asked myself that. That's something that I think we all need to ask ourselves: is que fuimos y en que nos convertimos. I think one of the things that I want to talk. I've talked too much today, but one of the things I would tack on to my advice is take those Latinx studies classes. Aprovecha from the Spanish and Portuguese department, because that was the first time I read books from Spanish authors in an academic context. Because some of us, my mom was from DR, from the island, so she, showed me how to read Gabriel Garcia Marquez, but you also read, ¿cómo que se llama la profesora? Petra, I'm going to butcher her last name, but she also taught a course on reggaeton. You read so many histories. I took a class with Profesor, esta memoria me está fallando hoy, but I took a class with a Cuban professor who taught about Latinx history. Desde la isla, desde el Centro Caribe, from all over North and South America, uno aprende de verdad qué fue lo que pasó. So you're right. We should mind that more. I got a taste of it, but I wish I had spent more time in the library leyendo más about our people.
But we can get our alumni library cards, and as members of ALPA, we can organize cultural events, and we are lifelong learners. I want to inspire you all to continue to mine the resources in future ALPA conferences. Let's all organize not expeditions, but yeah, I have my library card, my Princeton library card as an alum, and let's continue to take advantage of these things. The alumni council that organizes trips? What can we propose as trips and designed by ALPA to visit our countries of origin and Spain as well? Yes, we debate our name and so forth. Miren, un hispano es una persona de cultura hispanohablante. We profess customs, some of which are shared in common. We can't feel guilt or ignore that. We need to be honest as well and brave. And we need to recognize our particular dynamic, because it's one thing, the experience we have in the States, but what we bring from our countries of origin, even if we've never set foot in it, we come with certain dynamics, and we need to look at them without feeling ashamed or feeling too critical. What was blanqueamiento, whether in Mexico, whether in Argentina, whether in the Caribbean? What was blanqueamiento and what has it done with us? There are scholars working now, including a person who has been a visiting fellow at Princeton and whom I would love to have speak to us. She's from Guadalajara. She defines herself as a negra mestiza, which is true. She's phenotypically black, but she's obviously mixed. She teaches at Cambridge. She did her early degrees in Mexico, and with other scholars who are of white phenotype, of mestizo, more maybe towards the indigenous direction. They're all talking about blanquitud in a post-racial Mexico. The same conversations have been had in Argentina, the Afro-Argentine Studies Department at the Universidad de Córdoba. And it's not just people who are phenotypically black, it's people who are white. People who are white and who don't owe anybody an apology or don't owe anybody artificial explanations, but they are discovering their personal past and the pasts of their nation. And that's going to fuel us as Latinos or Latinx, o lo que ustedes lo quieran llamar, los nombres para nosotros nunca, unless they're despectivos, unless they're despectivo. I can't believe this. And I've spent, okay, unless they're derogatory. If we spend too much energy on those things and not on our history and on people leading parallel lives, Latinos back in our home countries who are rising to the occasion, questioning post-racial worlds. What does it mean, blanquitud? What does negritud mean? And what does mestizaje mean for progressives? Then what are we doing with our Princeton educations and our identities as Latinx or whatever? What are we doing? What are we becoming? And I have no objection, because it's reality. I have no objection to assimilation, leaving behind. We marry people, and we're not bad because of that. We're not. What I'm just saying is, let's use our intellectual and cultural power, and let's use the ability to, let's organize trips. I'm thinking of an alumnus who does just that. He has a master's program, and he takes students around to different points in Spain, Mexico. He's taken them to Honduras, to Cuba, just to get people in an international framework from a Latin or Latinx or Latino perspective. Let's do it, people. Let's do it.
Well, that's definitely the role of ALPA, or ALPA can play a role, and Recuerdos can play a role, because the beauty of this session, we're having individuals from the 70s, the first decade leading into the early 80s, where there were Latinos of significant numbers on campus, to the most recent decade. We're covering 50 years of history here, and there's so much to learn from each other, and there's so much how we can help each other. And unfortunately, we're a few minutes over this session, but there are so many different ways that we can help each other. We should come up with those ways. Let's through ALPA make suggestions on how we can support each other through our journeys, and we each win, regardless of our decade. We all win if we help each other get to a better place. And Recuerdos hopefully has played a little bit of a role in that, but there's still so much to go. there's still so much that we can do. And I want to be Cora, any last few thoughts, because we're going on 15 minutes past our allotted time, and I want to make sure that we don't take more time from individuals than they had initially committed. But any thoughts from anyone before we close? Any response to Cora from anyone specifically, or to Marcia before we close?
I did just want to add something to what Cora said, because I thought it was quite interesting. And one mission that I kind of set out to realize while I was at Princeton was just kind of reconciling with my identity. So, because I was born in Mexico, so I have this Mexican identity, but my parents were Cuban, and Princeton gave me the opportunity to go to Cuba to study there. And, going there, I thought that perhaps I could, find myself there. But I realized that I'll never be 100% that, because it actually wasn't what I grew up with. So it made me realize the complexity of that, like kind of cultural identity. So although it helped me reconcile it, it helped me problematize it. And I think problematizing my identity was part of that. So I think as I go forward, I realize that I'm not going to be able to really categorize myself. I'm not going to be able to fit myself into a category. But what I can do perhaps is like find those roots that are important to me. Like I feel like when I think about Latino, I think about the kindness in that community. I think about like how driven it is to socialize and be, help others. And I don't see that in all communities. I don't see that in all cultures. So I come back to that. I always think to come back to that. So I think like when I think about those things that will hopefully tie us together, I think about those values, because the cultures themselves can be so different. So yeah, I just wanted to add that to what Cora said.
I come back to what Maria said. We have to put our ancestral cultures in vitrina. It really hit me what Maria Huerta said, why aren't we having cultural exhibitions? And we don't have to. We're not the people that we were or that our parents were. But we've got to make those connections, those international connections. Our peoples are not, there's a lot of sophistication. We have earning power. We have educations. We need to network, like, for example, Maria alluded to the Asian communities. You've all heard PRC, ABC, Greeks, the Hellenic Studies program at Princeton, that connection between Greek Americans and Greeks. We perhaps need to see ourselves with other eyes. We're not from impoverished cultures. And that warmth that you're describing, Ricardo, that comes from forces that were not always intended to benefit everyone, but which we have the power to shape. We hear, and rightly fully so, critiques of mestizaje, because we know what the governments wanted to do. But the fact that we can all be comfortable together, the fact that we can all, we have the power. We have the power to deal with that. But everybody is on their journey. I'm just making that suggestion. Otherwise, do we just want to be social club?
No, we support each other. We support each other.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that, sorry. I just wanted to point out that, like, as somebody who's been on these sessions a lot with Ricardo, Juana, Aseneth, also part of the team, and who've listened, is I don't know if you expected this, Ricardo, but for me, I feel like a lot of this processing has been a kind of a healing journey for people. So I just love that. And I love what that does for all of our voices. and all of our potential for leadership, because we've heard a lot of these themes, right? We've heard of these things about, feeling that you were sort of excluded, maybe socially. You experienced, our 80s folks talked about a lot of just like kind of in your face racism. Laura also talked about this kind of, in your face, just, totally like just right there racism in the years that she was there, all this stuff. And, the challenge of us, the sort of, I hope that ALPA becomes this kinds of institution that inspires leadership, that we take what, what hurt us in the past and we're stronger, and that we be the change in whatever, venue that we are at, be it a school board, be it whatever, whatever. I think a lot of us try to be that change in the spaces that we inhabit. And we try to make better the fact that we were at Princeton, and this was the first place, maybe some of us learned about certain things or our cultures or whatever. So, how do we change that for the next generation? I think this is what this is all about in your intention, Rick. So I just love that part of it, the healing part.
Yes. Yeah. And being there for each other. And the beauty of having Marcia and Cora and Inocencia and Modesta and Jerry and, the 70s and the 80s are here to help the zeros and the tens. And we're all, through this experience, have become family of some sort. We are the tios and tias. So let's take advantage of it. Let's support each other.
Ricardo, maybe another session could be to gather folks who are in higher education, our Latino alums that are in higher education, to do kind of a career thing about how do you get into higher education. We are so few of the teachers in colleges and universities. The reason I was late, I was on a Zoom, which is an offshoot from Recuerdos. I was on a Zoom with Manuel Garcia y Griego, who's class of 73, Daniel Erdman, who's class of 73, and Mirna, who's class of 82. And we've now been Zooming about once a month, about every 6 weeks. And it's just getting together to talk, getting to know our families, because we've lost touch with each other. But also today, we had a big discussion about just the role of Spanish and the diversity of Spanish and that commonality of, if we do speak that language, Margaret, Northern New Mexico, especially the Spanish in Northern New Mexico is unique. And Professor Lozano wrote a book about, and so we were exchanging books to read, book titles to read. I was so struck with the recent alums that just spoke this time about all the different Latinx courses that you could take. Well, Daniel and Manuel were talking about the very first Puerto Rican history student-initiated seminar that was done in 1972, I think. I helped organize, and Larry had 2 years before me, the first Chicano history seminar at Princeton. And now there's all these other classes that you can take, the Caribbean experience and whatever other people were talking about. There has been progress, and each decade of students, I think, has made a real impact on the academia of Princeton. And I just want to say that we belong there. We deserve to be there. We have a lot to add. And it's not just a cultural addition. We have intellectual curiosity. We have, values. We have work ethic that sometimes we outdo other people because, yes, we do have to work harder sometimes, a lot of times. Yes. So I'm just so grateful to Alpa and Margaret and Ricardo and Juana and the rest of the team that have put these together, because I think it's not just healing, it's growthful. For me, it's the continuous lifelong learning, that ethic of being a lifelong learner. I have this list. There's Ruben Cobos, who wrote a book on New Mexico and Southern Colorado Spanish that Daniel Erdman talked about. So thank you all for it, and for the more recent grads. I'm retired now. I'm happy to have conversations, phone calls. I'm not great at organizing Zooms, but if somebody else organizes it, just to talk about career. I happen to have stayed in the same employer for almost 40 years. So I didn't jump around a lot of places, but I was fine. I did a lot of different things within the one employer. I didn't stagnate, you know. But anyway, love you all. Gracias.
Thank you.
Love,
Thank
love.
you.
Love you, Marcia.
Love you, Marcia. Thank you for joining. Always a treat
Yes.
to have you.
I know it's 9:22 Eastern, and it's been a great session. Thank you for everyone that participated. I think there's 10 of us still on the call, and it's been, as the other ones have been, it's amazing. And frankly, I mean, thank you to everyone for the 10s, but the other decades as well, because the other decades showing up for this, for you in the 10s, shows the support that you have, and we'll do more of these on different themes, and we'll have representation across the decades, and you'll see those role models. You'll see the Marcias and the Coras, the Inocencias and the Jerrys, and we'll be. I know all those folks are there for you. We're here for you, and there'll be more support in the future. Margaret, do you want to close it as the ALPA president?
Yeah, sure. As always, so much gratitude to you, Rick, and to Juana, who really created our website. I can send that out to the registrants if you haven't seen that before. Please remember that this project started with really Ricardo and Juana's inspiration to do this, and really kind of started asking for submissions. So we are still actively seeking submissions. We would love to have anything that you would like to submit. It could be prose form, it could be in poetic form, it could be an art piece. We are asking, well, we have asked a few times, and some of our board members have been a little bit slow to respond, and that includes me. I'm very busy, got a full-time job, kids, dogs, everything. But if you want to actually do, any kind of an artistic piece, we really would love to see that too. It's really sort of anything. It can be photos, it can be a collage, just something to, put down, your memories. And again, the idea is to, all of us matter. Our stories matter. It's not just that we add, we make Princeton better. We make our presence there was actually, a transformational act. Just even one person transformed that institution that really was not created for us. So, yay to us, and yay to us keeping forward and moving that change and making it better for further generations, which I know I absolutely know was a kernel of Ricardo's inspiration. So thank you also to the team members, the other members of this team. We meet bi-weekly. Every 2 weeks we sit on a Sunday and hash out what we're going to do with this project. And that includes our wonderful writer and poet. She didn't talk about that, but she has all of these skills. High school teacher extraordinaire, Aseneth Garza Scott from the great class of 2013, who's wonderful. Our vice president, Jeremy Bourgeon, from classes, undergraduate class of 10 and also graduate class of 17. Laura Pena, who is our new board member. And I just love that we have this span and range of representation all the way to the class of 2019. It did boggle our minds when we thought about you were the last class before COVID. And here you are here with all of us, hanging with us, OGs. Thank you so much. You bring so much just expertise and invigoration of our young people. You are our ALPA future, and we're so glad to have you. And all of you 2010s are. If you're not involved in ALPA, please, get involved, be the change, make it better for the next generations. You can be that person. We have institutions like Sunday Cafecitos that are put on by Conexiones to, be a virtual hosting space for exactly those types of networking connections that people were talking about. So please, as TigerNet develops and gets into its newest incarnation, it's at 2.0. It's had a couple hitches today, but hopefully it'll be smooth sailing after that. Get involved, please. We always need your energy and your ideas. So thank you. And with that, I'll wish everybody a beautiful good evening. And we hope to see everybody again. And thank you all to our amazing facilitators. Thank you so much for everybody for being vulnerable and sharing tonight. And thank you for our project team and you, Ricardo. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Goodbye.
Thank you.